Okay, so today we're going to be continuing what we were talking about yesterday. We're making an Eruv with items that are inaccessible to some people or are forbidden to some people. The question is, would that work for your Eruv? Because the purpose of the Eruv is everybody joined together, and if you make it an inaccessible area, that kind of defeats the purpose of it being an Eruv, of everybody being together if, well, you're not actually all together. So we started discussing the case where things are usher to other people because they're either because they swore off of it or because they're Kohen and it's Truma. So now we're continuing on in that vein with we were talking about the case of the Kohen when the Eruv was put somewhere where he cannot access it because it is in a graveyard or it is in a place that is suffix Tumah that he cannot enter.
Rabbi, where are we?
I haven't said yet. Don't worry. I'm just recapping. So now
okay.
we're on the last three words on the bottom line of Lamed Amud Bet, heading on to Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So Hadatanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ma'arvin LaKohen Tahor B'Truma Tahor B'Kever Heit Yazim. So the BAYT says. Remember Yehuda that you can make an Eruv for a Kohen with Truma Tahora in a grave. So how does that work? Like, how would he go and get it? And also, how can you possibly set that up? Because so how would he get there? So that the Kohen get there, as mentioned the other day, is Bishida B'Tevel Migdal. He can get there assuming he goes in a carriage or crate or cupboard, which is his own separate area, which will protect him from Tumah Mate, and that'll solve the problem. Because then he can't, if he's not Tumah, then he didn't violate any Isser, and that's how he can get towards it. But wait, but how does that work? If you put the Truma on a grave, then it's Truma Tamea, and that's, you're not allowed to Matame Truma deliberately. So what are you doing? So rather, what would you say the case is? Either it's where the Truma has not yet been susceptible to Tumah, because let's say if you have fruit or vegetables that haven't yet come in contact with any of the 7 fluids, they're not considered to be Tumah yet. So that's one option. Or you could say that basically it's bread which is made with fruit juice, because bread made with fruit juice isn't true bread, and therefore it won't be susceptible to becoming impure from Tumah Mate. So then also fine. So now he's there and the food's there, and the food's not Tameh yet. So Vehechi Maitila. So then how would you bring the food from the grave to him? Rather, he's going to have to use unfinished wooden utensils in order to that don't have anything to pick up that can't hold anything, and that's how he will be able to do so. So basically, he's gonna have to try and grab it with chopsticks, more or less. Not a very easy endeavor. But then wouldn't the utensil itself then be over a grave and then itself become tameh and therefore be being the tameh the kohen? Rather, he holds the piece of wood sideways in such a manner that there isn't so that there isn't a tefah's worth of it over the grave. That way, it won't be able to become impure. Because that way, if there's an insufficient surface area, or is that insufficient area over a grave, if it's too narrow, then that also solves the problem. So basically, you're trying to do this with chopsticks. So that seems to be the case. So
Rabbi, wouldn't chopsticks be considered a keli because it's
So by chopsticks, I don't mean like formally fashioned into chopsticks. I mean, let's say you took 2 sticks and used them like chopsticks.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because what? Yes. Excellent point, Phil.
I don't know. I'm into sushi.
So right. So they're unfinished. Right. So that means basically you found 2 sticks. You try using like chopsticks. as everybody knows, if you try and use chopsticks, it's hard to begin with. Even more so when you don't have them when they're not pointy or having flat edges. It's nearly impossible. It's very hard to do. But you could do it if you tried hard enough and you really wanted to. So we say the small enough. That's the reason. So right. So now if this whole circumstance really can work, my time to Rabbanan. Then why did the Rabbanan say it's usher? Because look, see, we can do it. Kasavar usher like no BAYT b'surei hana. So why they say you can't? Why you can't put the Eruvin in the graveyard? Because they have another opinion that you're not allowed to buy a house with things that are usher in hana. Why is that a problem? Because you're not supposed to benefit from a grave, so you're not supposed to be using the graveyard for any purpose besides because it's a graveyard, right? It's just not something because dead bodies are usher b'hana for purposes of for these purposes. So that's why if you were to be benefiting from the grave, that means that the Kohen is benefiting from something that is usher, which is bad. Also, it's also for him as well. And in general, you're not allowed to get enough from graves, and the Kohen definitely cannot.
But are we saying, Rabbi, that applies to all of us? So you can't go for a stroll in a cemetery or have a picnic, which sounds gross, but I know you can't sit under a tree or.
So it's referring to the grave itself. Like as in,
I see. Okay.
It's important to remember that the ancient graveyard isn't the modern graveyard.
Uh-huh.
So okay. It's more like as in used to have like burial tombs, and as well as
like the caves and things
as well as caves. They didn't really have the modern sense of graveyards yet.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be like the whole large region is usher. It's more like the grave itself, where they happen to be, is usher. The concept of burying in them, it happened sometime. The change happened around the time, shortly after the time of the Gemaras, when people started burying in graves as opposed to in communal burial areas like mausoleums.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right. For more on that, we'll when we get to Moed Katan, we'll be able to talk more about burial practices. So I think that's about a year from now, so it'll be a while. But we'll get there. Don't worry. So Michlal Derby Yehuda Savar Mutar. So does that mean that Yehuda says that that's okay, so you derive a benefit from the graves? So Kasavar mitzvot lav lehenat. No, you're not, because you don't actually get hana from mitzvot. So therefore, even though you might be something that's asur hana, there's no actual benefit you get from it because it's a mitzvah. So that's how you can get around that issue. So Elahadam Rava. What about the opinion of Rava, who says mitzvah lav lehenat? So, like he says that mitzvot aren't. He says the mitzvot aren't to give you benefit. So Lema Katanai Amral Lishmate. So why don't you say that Rava agrees with the statement then? So Amral Lach Rava Isvir Lahud Aim Arvin El Dvar Mitzvah Dechule Alma Mitzvah Lav Leheninu. So if you hold that you're not allowed to make an eruv except for Dvar Mitzvahs, this is particularly for an eruv Tchumen, where we say that that's the case. For an eruv Tchumen, you're only supposed to do it if you're doing it to get to a, let's say it's either to do some for mitzvah on Shabbos, whether that be the mitzvah of owning Shabbos, the mitzvah of getting to shul, the mitzvah of going to Talmud Torah. Point is, you have to, you can't simply do a Erev Tchumen for no purpose. You're supposed to have a purpose when you do so. Like you have to be going somewhere that has a mitzvah of some sort involved with it. So if you say that if you were arguing those similar lines, so I mean, just like you can't be ma'arev erev tchumen except for a mitzvah, the chulei alma mitzvah v'lehanenu, which would imply that then everybody agrees that really mitzvah aren't meant to be used for benefit, and that's why everybody has that rule. And so then what are we really arguing about then? Here's the argument. Mar savar ema arvin elul dvar mitzvah. Mar savar arvin afilu dvar harashut. No, rather what must we say the argument is are you allowed to make an eruv for only for a dvar mitzvah or even for a voluntary matter? In which case that would mean that you are actually going to be you're having a benefit because of our rishus. You get things that you voluntarily are doing that aren't considered mitzvah are considered to be things you benefit from. So Elahad Amar of Yosef Ema Arvin Dvar Mitzvah Lemikutanai Amre Lishmate. So rather of Yosef who says that who is of the opinion that you can only make an eruv for the purpose of a mitzvah. So why don't you say that this halach there the Beit follows him then? So what would Rav Yosef say? So Amar Rav Yosef. The Chule Alma Eino Arvin Ela Dvar Mitzvah. Everybody agrees you're not supposed to make an eruv except for a Dvar Mitzvah. The Chule Alma Mitzvah Lav Henenu, right? And also everybody agrees that mitzvah are meant to be for your benefit. This is what we argue about. Mar Savar Kevan Dekana Le Eruv Lo Nechale Demintara. Mar Savar Nechale Demintara Deistrak Achile. So the question isn't about what's the reasoning behind making your eruv or whether or not there's mitzvot or something that you get benefit from. Rather, they're arguing about whether when you decided to make the eruv and you use that food towards your eruv, do you want to be guarded or not? One says that so according to opinions that it's beneficial that's being guarded by being by the grave. So it's oftentimes graves that either would have guards put up there or because there's walls around the grave and that will protect us. Therefore, you are getting benefit. Or because, right, and why is that considered beneficial? Because if you wanted to, you could then go and get it and eat it. Whereas if you simply left your eruv, if an eruv gets eaten on Shabbos, you're still fine caring for that Shabbos. Just you won't be able to reuse it. So as in, or eat it or use it for next Shabbos. So here it's like I set my eruv there, so you're good to go. Even if let's say you went over and ate it, that's fine. Or if let's say somebody else, like you left your loaf of bread, in the middle on the side of the road, and not in anybody's house or anything else, and then an animal came and ate it. As long as it was there, that's when Shabbos came in, it doesn't matter that animal then took it. Okay, now we're going to Mishnah for. New Mishnah. So again, we're continuing on with the topic of what are you allowed to use for an eruv. Now we're getting some more examples of items that you can or can't use, and I'll explain what they are in the Mishnah, and then we'll get to the Gemara to discuss why you're allowed to use them. Okay. Ma'arvin b'dmai, b'mas narishon shnitla termato, b'maser sheni v'hekesh sheniftu, v'koni b'chala. So you're allowed to make an eruv with dmai, which is purchased from an amaretz, from somebody who's not stringent in the laws of trumot and maasra. So you're allowed to buy. So basically, it's treated as safek tevel midrabanan. So therefore, that you're allowed to make an eruv with. And for the maaser that goes to the Levi after the Levi is given the portion to the Kohen, you're allowed to use that. That's considered to be that which then is it doesn't have any kedusha at this point because the problem that makes the kadosh and problematic is the truma part of it. But afterwards, the Levi can use it, or Yisrael can use it as well. Again, assuming that the Levi gave it to Yisrael. Or if you had Ma'aser Sheni, which is the second tithe that you give in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, or Hekdesh, which is stuff that you had dedicated towards the purposes of the Beit Mikdash, and then you decide both these things after they had been sanctified, you then in turn paid their value plus a fifth to make them unsanctified. So those things would be allowed to be used after you've removed the sanctity. And a Kohen can make an eruv with challah. When we say challah, we don't mean the challahs that we now eat. We mean the portion of the bread that must be removed and given to the Kohen. So that's what we're referring to. So the Kohen could use the bread that he was given from that allotment. Aval lo b'tevel, But you cannot make an Eruv with tevel, which is untithed produce, not with Masarishon before the Trumat Maaser has been given to the Kohen, and not with Maaser Sheni, which is meant to be eaten in Yerushalayim, or with Hekdesh that is yet to be redeemed. Both of those things are not considered to be valid for making an Eruv. So Demai, halal chazile. Well, how can a person make an Eruv with Demai? He's not supposed to eat that. Like it's forbidden. So Migo to Ibai Mafkir Lahula Nifsev Haviani Chazile, Hashanami Chazile. So since if a person were to forgo all of their worldly possessions, they would become a poor person, therefore he'd be able to eat Demai. And therefore now he's allowed to make an Eruv with Demai. And wait, so since when are you allowed to do that with a poor person who eats Demai? It's not according to the Mishnah. And why is that machilat anim demai v'tachsanai demai? You can feed you can feed poor people demai, and you can feed soldiers demai. So right, so once you become into that category, then you can then have demai as well, because again it's only midrabanan. So part of the original zera of midrabanan of offering demai allowed for its usage to be given to poor people as well as to soldiers who are currently being quartered in your home. So Amar Huna, Tana Beit Shammai Omrim, Ein Machilen Tanim Demai. Vehil Omrim Machilen Tanim Demai. So the Rav Huna says there's actually this machloket in a Breita that Shammai says you can feed poor people Demai. Beit Shammai says you cannot. Vehil Omrim Machilim et Anim Demai. You can feed them demai. So and since we follow Beit Hillel, so therefore you're allowed to feed the poor people demai, and that's why you can use it for an Eruv, because even though currently you're not, because at any given moment a person could declare all of their assets to be ownerless, and therefore then he'll be poor and be able to have it. So, Masa Rishon Shnitla Trumato.
Rabbi, quick, what about soldiers? Why don't they address that? Would they agree that you could feed soldiers, or?
It's basically because it's considered to be a strain on you. It's not you. It's somebody. They're equivalent to poor people in this case.
Okay.
More so because it's just hard, as in, for instance, one of the reasons why the United States left the being a British colony was because they were upset about them being forced to quarter soldiers, because it was a very big financial burden on the people when that happened. So similarly here, it's like it is a financial burden if a soldier, if the garrison shows up and like feed us, and like people are poor. So let me rephrase. The people in general are not rich. So as in to sustain, platoon of soldiers is very difficult. So therefore you can, it's equivalent to things you give to the poor. So now we're talking about, continuing on an explanation of the things from the Mishnah. So Ma'aser Rishon that Shenitla Trumato. So Ma'aser Rishon that has already been given its portion to the Kohen. So now it is mutter for the Levi, is considered to be chulin. So Pshita, isn't this obvious that it would be mutter at this point? Lo tzricha, no, we needed this to be stated. Shektimo b'shibolin, v'nitlo mimenu trumat maaser, v'lo mimenu truma gedola. What happened is that it was given out of order, that the Levi took his grain while it was still in the threshing floor. Before, and also he took out truma maaser from it, but this is before the owner had managed to separate out truma gedola, which is the most severe of all of the Isurim. So of all the Isurim, if you had it from Tevel, so truma gedola is the biggest one. It's a little ironic though, because truma gedola is actually is one of the things that has no shear has no set fixed amount that needs to be done. It was approximated by the Rabbanan to be either, the average amount is 1/50th of the total. If you're generous, it's 1/40th, and if you're stingy, it's 1/60th. So it's called Truma Gedola because of its severity, not because of its quantity. So, okay, so once you've given that would, so the issue is you went out of order. The question is what happens now to the status of everything? Is it everything still remains being tavel, meaning everything still is forbidden and we're stuck? Or are we saying that it's allowed even though you did things out of order? So could Rabbi Avahu Amar Rish Lakish, Damar Rabbi Avahu Amar Rish Lakish, as Rabbi Avahu said, name Rish Lakish, Masa Rishon Shekima B'Shibolin, Masa Rishon you took too early, Patra Truma Gedola. You don't have to actually end up taking Truma Gedola, Shnemav Harimotem Imenu Trumat Hashem Maser Mina Maser. As it states, you shall take from the Maser Rishon another truma, another portion towards God, a tenth of the tenth. So that's truma maaser goes to Kohen. So maaser mina maaser marti lecha. You need to take maaser from another maaser to get to the Kohen. Lo truma gadola or truma maaser mina maaser. So right, look at Chila. You should always be, of course, you should have made sure that truma gadola is taken from the whole thing before you took out maaser rishon. But once you took out the maaser rishon, you only required to take out the truma maaser and give it to the Kohen. Not required to give the Kohen also truma gedola from that portion. So Amar le Rapapa labaye. So then Rapapa says to Baye, Ihachi afilu hikdimu b'chri nami. So Rapapa says, so why are you saying that we're talking about the time when it was taken from the threshing floor, even if it was you taken it earlier from the time when they were still in the stalks? Amar le alach amar kram ekol mas rotechem terimu et trumat Hashem. And that's what it says. From all that is given to you, you shall set aside truma to God. So the phrase mikol is indicating that truma gedola must be separated in the case where you took it not from threshing floor, but from the before it was even chayav. Yeah, then you'd be required to do so. Because in this case, where it's already chayav in truma gedola, but you went out of order by accident, is the only case where where we would allow you to be patur. But if you had taken it before the chiyuv kicked in, that'd still be a problem. Umarita, and why? What made you say that this is the drasha? High idgan, but high low idgan. Why are you comparing the two different cases? One is when the grain is still in the stalks and it's not yet in a usable form towards being grain, and one is when it is. So how are we comparing these two? Right? The wording of the pasuk itself seems to be clearly talking about when it's already been harvested, not when it's still in its raw form. Because again, grains are really the berries of grass, basically. So as in, we're not talking about when they're still all together stalks, sheaves, chaff, everything. We're interested in is the berry there. It's like, why are you including everything else in this? And like, how are you possibly saying that you take truma so early? So the answer is that you really can't compare that. You can't really compare the two. Right, so that's why we say that's why their dinim are so different, because when it's not yet grain, it's not yet chayev. So therefore, what you didn't solve any problems. You gave the Levi got stuff as if it's still tevel because it hadn't been chayev yet. So we're back to square one. It has to do separate everything properly from it. Okay, so next part of the Mishnah is Master Sheni v'Hekesh Sheniftu. If you have Master Sheni, that's supposed to be in your Shalim, or somebody dedicated, or food that had been dedicated to the Beit Midrash that you had then redeemed and made unconsecrated. So that you could then use that food once it's unconsecrated to be used in the Eruvin. So Pshita, isn't this obvious? Lo tzricha. No, you need to say it. Why? Shenatana tekeren v'lo natana techomesh. Because you only paid the principal, but you didn't pay the additional fifth. So, and when we say fifth here, it's really an additional 25% because it ends up being 1/5 of the final amount. So the Chumash Malan, the Ena Chumash Ma'akev, and therefore we learn that the Chumash isn't Ma'akev in terms of removing the kedusha, but as in like you simply haven't done it properly. But as far as technically, is it now mutter? The answer is yes. Okay. Next part of the Mishnah states avalo b'tevel. You cannot make an eruv with tevel. Shita is not obvious. It's usher. So like really usher. Lo tzricha b'tevel tavul midrabanan. No, we're talking about a case where it's tevel, but only midrabanan. Kagon shezra'o batzitz she'eno nakov. For instance, if you planted the grains in a potted plant without holes, then it's considered to be only chayiv in truma d'masret midrabanan because technically it's not connected to the ground. So that's the case. So teaching that this midrabanan is also forbidden. So the low maser rishon shalonet la trumata. And also you can't do it with maser rishon if you have that's because the Levi hasn't separated the portion for the Kohen yet. Shita, this is obvious because it's usher. Lo tzricha sheik dimo b'chri. Now rather, what was the case? Is where you took it too early. As we spoke about earlier, v'nitla mimenu trumat maser v'lo nitla mimenu truma gedola. Because where you took it too early and you only separated out trumat maser, but you really should have been chayav to separate out from this portion also truma gedola. Ma'udatema kadamar le repapa labai. So maybe you're stating this is before we heard about the discussion of Papa and Abai earlier. So therefore the Mishnah is teaching us that actually the discussion we had before between Papa and Abai was actually correct, and it told us about the elements correctly. Okay, now continuing on in the Mishnah. Also, you can't do it with Ma'aser Sheni, that's Medrash Shalayim, or with hekdesh that you've not yet redeemed. Shita isn't obvious that because they have to be redeemed before you're allowed to use them. Lo tzricha shavda'an v'lo b'da'an kilchatan. Well, there was a case where you redeemed them, but you did it improperly. Ma'aser shavda'an al gabe asimon. For the Ma'aser Sheni, you properly redeemed it because you put it on an asimon, which is a raw metal, as opposed to metal that is minted into a coin. Which is and how you know that you have to have a coin that is minted as opposed to simply raw metal. Rahman Amar pasuk says, "B'tzarta hakesef kesef sheishla alav tzura." So you shall so based on the direction of the pasuk, if you shall form the silver. So therefore, your money has to have a image. It has to have an image on it, meaning it has to be minted. Hekdesh and similarly for hekdesh, if you decided to try and remove the hekdesh from the fluid pushing onto land, but the pasuk says you shall redeem it for kesef and then it shall remain. You shall redeem it for money, and this shows here you didn't use it redeem it for money. You simply redeemed it with land, which is not an acceptable thing to use for redeeming hekdesh. Things that are consecrated toward this Mikdash. Okay. So now that we've figured out what we can use the Eruv for, now where this mission is going to discuss who's allowed to bring your Eruv to the other location for you. So this is referring to either the case of for Eruv Chatzerot or Eruv Tchumen, so where it's not going to be housed where you are, but it's going to be housed at another location. So the question is, does that work or not? So if you were to have sent your Eruv, meaning the food of your Eruv, together with in the hands of a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, or somebody who denies the existence of an eruv, that's not considered to be an eruv. So the imam marla but if you had somebody else who is going to accept the eruv from them, then that would be fine. So, for instance, let's say if you're going to be giving the eruv, let's say if you're going to send the eruv to your neighbor, and you want to send your young child to go deliver it, that's fine. There's actually a nice story about that in the Yerushalmi where it says that how do you know that that an eruv is meant to be a that basically that the eruv is meant to generate goodwill from one another within the eruv. So it says that one time there was two women who were fighting, and then one time, and then then one of the women sent her heir together with her young son to the other woman who was upset at her, and then when the child delivered it and was so nice about it, then the woman then realized that their feud was really not such a big feud, and they were able to make up afterwards, all thanks to having sent the Eruv. So there is a reason to sometimes to send things with young children for all those whether as far as the halachic basis for it's working. So for Eruv it works. Whether or not you should be doing so for other mitzvot, it'll depend on the mitzvah and whether or not, like say, especially say for Purim, should you send your so can you send it with your children below the age of bar bat mitzvah? So you probably should at least hand one to somebody else yourself, but for the rest, it should be fine. Because you're only allowed to do one l'shalach one not two foods to one person. So that would be so therefore afterwards you think your child will both be good educationally as well as a very fun part of Purim. So now we're going to discuss what's the issue with having a Chirshut or Katan. So particularly for the Katan. So the Gemara says the Katan wait, why can't you send it with a Katan? Amar Ravuna Katan gova et Eruv. But didn't Ravuna explicitly state that a Katan can go collecting the food for the Eruv? So lo kasha kan be'eruv tchumen kan be'eruv echat Eruv. For Eruv tchumen is the case where you can't have the child involved because the person needs to be a proper shaliach to place the Eruv. Whereas for Eruv Chatzerot, because he's not the one who's really making the Eruv. So if he collects it all and then has somebody else do it, then it's fine. Because we're just much more lenient. Also, we're more lenient about Eruv Chatzerot, which is why we even let a Katan do it, because we've incented to let people do an Eruv Chatzerot, which means joining the courtyard, which is the modern Eruv. We're typically a lot more makel than we are for Eruv Tchumen, because Eruv Chatzerot is to allow people to carry, and it's also in case somebody, it also will remove most of the Isur involved from, if somebody accidentally carries something, now they will no longer have violated any Isur whatsoever. So it is considered to be very beneficial to have. So we're more makel for that. So Obiyad Mish Enomoda Be'eruv. So who's the person? So he said, it would be problematic to send somebody who doesn't agree to Eruv. So what does that mean? So man, who is this? Rav Chisda Kutai. Rav Chisda says this is a Samaritan, a Kuti, who don't believe in the Torah Shabbat Peh. The im amar la'acher l'kablohimenu harei Eruv. If you give it to somebody else, then it would be considered to be an Eruv. For leichush dilma lo mamti, like, wait, but why aren't we worried in general that whether it would be the Chirshut v'Katan or the guy who doesn't believe in Eruv, like, why don't we just simply say, well, what if he doesn't bring it to them? Like, how are we knowing that it was brought to the next party? Similarly, as Rav Chisda states regarding another case where you stand and you watch it, here too is where you basically you're sending it across the street or like down the block. You're not sending it a place you can't see. You're sending it somewhere close by so you can see if it actually gets there or not. Just you just can't be bothered to actually bring it yourself. So wait, why don't you worry that maybe he's going to take some from it and therefore it won't be the right amount? So should you be worried that he'll take some off, or somebody else, or the other person won't take it from him? So because you can't really see fully what happens far away from it's far away. So rather that's what Rav Yechiel says, that we have a chazaka. Right, so that means we have a strong assumption that a shaliach will do what he is told. A messenger will do what he is imparted with to do. A shaliach will do his shlichut. Here too, even though the messengers are not a typically fit messenger, but we can trust them enough that the agent that you appointed will be sufficiently competent to fulfill what you have asked them to do. even again in this case, it's a lesser form of shlichut, a lesser form of agency. It's also sufficient. Wait, but how do we know this Rav Chisda and Rav Chiel say these things in regards to the chazaka about shlichut? That we know that we believe that a messenger will have fulfilled his mission. Like, how do we know that? And like, where do they learn that from? So, aha itmar. It was written in this regard. Tanya learned in Braita. Natano lapil v'holicho lakof v'holicho ein ze eruv. So when do those statements come up? So if one gave an eruv to a trained elephant, or brought it to a monkey, or brought it to and then afterwards by putting it on these animals, and then brought it to the case, to the place that you need it to be. In the eruv, that's not a good eruv. V'im amar l'achar like below hamenu harei the eruv. But if he had put it on his elephant or monkey, and then told somebody else to take it off of the elephant or monkey, then it would be an eruv. The dilma lo mamtile. So shouldn't you be worried that the animal will fail in its delivery? And that's where Rav Chisda said that you just see that it was actually delivered if you sent it on an animal, because animals definitely we don't have the assumption of them doing the of like them being reliable in any sense because they're animals. So maybe the other person wouldn't have accepted it. Like, who's going to accept an error that a monkey brought you? So Rav Chiel says that the assumption is that the messenger does what you send it to do, even if that said messenger happens to be a monkey or an elephant. Yes, so this is definitely the most unexpected turn. So the Amar Nachman Mishal Torah, Ein Chazaka Shlech Oser Shlichuta. Rav Nachman says that in regard to things that are midoraita, that you cannot rely upon this assumption that the messenger will do his mission. V'shal Sofrim, Chazaka Shlech Oser Shlichuta. But if it's something that is Rabbanan, then we do rely on the assumption that a messenger will do his mission. Rav Sheshet Amar Rav Sheshet says either way, you will trust that he fulfills his mission. So Amar Rav Sheshet So where do you learn that everybody will do their missions? Because if once they have brought the korban omer in the Beit Mikdash, that is when we permit produce that was previously forbidden because it was considered to be chadash. It is not considered to be permitted. So hutar chadash miyad, everything is permitted immediately. So so now we're going to try. So we say that as soon as it's been brought, it's good. So now we're going to get how does that relate to the shlichut point? So harachokim mutarim mechatzot veilach, and the people who live far away from Yerushalayim are allowed to do so because are allowed to assume that the korban omer has been brought and therefore eat starting from midday and on. Wait, didn't we say that chadash is d'oraita? So how is this helping us? Right? This seems to go against our previous statement. So, and yet here it's stating that you're allowed to do it. All of your previously forbidden grains are now allowed, starting from midday. Would that not mean this whole thing is based on the chazaka that messenger does what you told him to do, and therefore that supports Rav Sheshet's opinion about the messenger doing and fulfilling his mission. Rav Nachman hatam katani tama lefish yodin she'ein beitin mitatlan bo. No, that's nothing to do with the fact of how good the agents are. Rather, it's a question of whether or not people will do their mission properly or not. Okay, so let's do another couple lines, and then I'll sum up. Bika de Amri, Amar of Nachman, Mna Aminila, Diktani Tamil Fish Yodin, Shan Beitin, Mitaslabo, and then Rav Nachman's, so another version of the story where Rav Nachman says it's not because of the messenger doing a good job, rather it's because the Beitin is on top of things. So Beitin who delom Mitaslabo, Hashalech Mitaslabo. So that would mean that we only rely on the Beitin to be reliable, but we don't rely on a single messenger to be reliable. Rav Shesha would have said, and again, this is their verse of the argument before, Beitin ad palge diyoma, shaliach kulayoma. So he says, you're right, Beitin is more trustworthy because they'll get it done by noon. But an individual messenger, he'll get it done, just it'll take a full day. Okay, so now let's so we covered a lot of ground today, and a lot of topics. So let's go back and we're gonna review. Let's review. So we started with talking about the case of having a Kohen being able to access the truma that when it's in a graveyard. How can the truma be fine, and how can the Kohen be able to get it? And we said that that truma is not yet susceptible to becoming impure, and the Kohen is in his box, and he's using kalim that are unsusceptible to truma, and he's using ones that are small enough that they will not be they'll not become impure by putting them over the grave, and also that there's no problem of benefiting from the grave itself, because the grave is not considered to be something that, even though the grave is something that you're not supposed to benefit from a grave, but here it's okay because mitzvot aren't considered to be something you benefit from. And then we did the debate about are mitzvot meant to be something that we derive benefit from, or are they not? We discussed also in regards to for Eruvin, as an Eruv, for an Eruv, do you get benefit from an Eruv or not? Depends on whether or not you're allowed to do an Eruv for voluntary purposes, or only for purposes that are actually a mitzvah. And then we also said it also comes down to even within that is do you care if your Eruv is guarded or not? Then we started discussing a case of things that you're more things you're allowed to use, which were demai, ma'aser rishon that has been had its truma removed, and ma'aser sheni and hektish that have been redeemed, and a kohen with challah, because these are all things that have now that either demai is only as to Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan didn't apply to the case of a poor person, and you go to become poor, therefore it's allowed for you. And for the rest of them, it's because at this given point they're considered to be fully mutar, even if they did something slightly wrong in the method of your taking them, as long as you did it. In the case of ma'aser rishon that you took as truma, or the case of ma'aser sheni and hektish that you redeemed, even though if you may have missed a little bit, it could be fine. But the second half of the Mishnah was talking about Tevel, ma'aser rishon that you didn't fix, as well as ma'aser sheni and hektish that have not been redeemed, but those are all problematic because those are all asur. And then the Gemara then went on to discuss why each of them are the case, and what we additionally learned from the fact that it's stated twice in the Mishnah, from the first half of the second half, and the added case, how each individual one added something new, such as if you took the ma'aser rishon before you take in truma gedola, right? So you're supposed to take first, or supposed to go truma and then ma'aser, and then ma'aser again, but instead you decided you skip the order. So we said it depends on whether or not you took at what point it's ma'aser. Was ma'aser taken in the very beginning, or was it taken in the before was even chayv at all, or do you take it basically in the middle, which in turn you basically did something wrong, but technically we say that it's fine and you're not required to redo the whole thing. Then we got to the next Mishnah. We're talking about using a chereshot v'kater, somebody who doesn't believe in Eruv as your messenger. We stated that it's problematic because it's problematic because they can't do your shlichut, so therefore they're no good for Eruv tchumen, but for Eruv katerot or more makel, and also even for Eruv Chatzerot, we only say that we were limiting the case to when you're able to oversee them, or at least a case where you're almost certain that they've definitely fulfilled it. So we had, and then we got into discussion of how do we know that about a shliach shlichuto, that a messenger will fulfill his mission. So. And then we're debating as to where that's learned from and how that is, and to what extent we would rely on him, whether that be we rely on them fully, as in meaning we should come in immediately, versus it being done by the end of the day, and how BAYT is more reliable than a messenger, but even so, neither of them is believed fully. The question is. I think that based in you still to give them at least till midday to do what they said they would do. Whereas for an individual, either if you don't believe that messengers do fill their missions, then they'll never have to get it done. If you believe that they do, you have to make sure that you give them a full day's worth of time to do so, because otherwise you can't rely that they'll actually do it in a timely fashion.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Have a great day.
Have a good day.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.